We're going to be looking at this whole concept of sick building syndrome. Is there a cure? And my mission isn't to give you the cure or the solutions. My mission at this point is simply to raise some of the issues, a synopsis of the issues. But to get us started, I want us to look at some definitions because I think it's critical we are all on the same page in terms of the words, the buzzwords that we may hear. And a few words I want to look at would be, this is here, syndrome, sick building syndrome, and these abbreviations. So I'll get right into it so that we can be, as I said, on the same page. To understand this concept of sick building syndrome, I think it's important that we even look at the word syndrome. Because a syndrome represents a situation where there's a group of signs and symptoms, often medical signs, things that the medical practitioners can pick up. And symptoms are the things that the individuals would experience. So you have persons experiencing some problems, making complaints. And if they go to the doctors, they can sometimes find some medical challenges, some indicators that all is not well. And these are all pointing or characterizing some particular abnormality or some condition. So that's what we are talking about when we mention the sick building. So these signs and symptoms in this particular case are being attributed to or blamed on the particular building. And often in this definition of a syndrome, there's an addition where we say that it is in fact this group of signs and symptoms that occur together and characterize a particular abnormality. And they go on to say, and often the particular cause or causes are not known. And that's what makes it a syndrome. And you're going to see as we move on, there's another definition of building-related illness. But my experience has been that in Barbados, we use them interchangeably. Every building-related illness is part of the syndrome. Whenever persons are not happy about the building, it's a sick building. Okay? So we tend to mix them up around here. But more specifically, the term sick building syndrome is used to describe situations in which building occupants experience acute health and comfort effects. Persons have the right to be comfortable at work. So it's not only good enough that they're not getting ill, but they need to be comfortable, and that's quite important. So they're experiencing these acute or short-term or immediate health and comfort effects, and they appear to be linked to the time spent in the building, but no specific illness or cause can be identified. So that's what we're talking about today in this sick building syndrome. And these complaints will be localized in a particular room, a particular office, a particular zone, or they may be widespread throughout the building. So that's one of our working definitions of the sick building. And it differs from being sick of the building. You know, there's some persons, as soon as they see the workplace, oh, I feel sick. You know, the people in there make them sick, the whole place make them sick, the pay structure make them sick. So you can be sick of your building, or you can be saying that the building is making you sick. So if you have those signs and symptoms and those discomforts that are linked to the periods of occupancy, then that is what we are speaking about today in terms of the sick building syndrome. Health Canada has given a definition of sick building syndrome, a set of symptoms related to chemical, particulate, or biological exposure that cannot be related to a specific cause, but are elevated when the occupants leave the building. And those of you in the field and those who actually interact with persons will often hear persons tell you that when they go home, they're fine. On weekends, they're fine. And then as soon as they come to work, within half an hour or half day, then the eyes are swelling and all sorts of problems are coming up. So that's really what we're talking about here, that these are linked to the periods of occupancy, and when the persons are away, they feel some sort of relief. The building-related illness, however, is a specific illness with a known cause, and that's really what makes the difference. So if you have mold in your building, the environmental health persons tell you there's mold. The staff tell you there's mold. You can see there's mold, smell there's mold, taste that there's mold. Then in the sick building, you got a moldy building and you got a mold problem. Okay, when you can put your finger on it. And one of the issues that I often come up with is that persons say or want to say that a building is sick when already the issue is known, but they just have not fixed it. So failure to address the problem does not make it a sick building. You may have a building-related illness, but you just have not addressed it. So if the particular illness has a cause that is known, there can be a direct link, then it's called a BRI, a building-related illness. In the cases where persons are experiencing this discomfort and ill health, during periods of occupancy, but there's no clear cause or set of causes, then is the proper way for using the term sick building syndrome. As I said, in Barbados, we tend to just throw them up. And I added this one here because being on the ground, I often have managers telling me, nothing wrong with this building, no, it's a case of mass hysteria. The problem is the building occupants, not the building. So you have a lot of persons who have reached that point, or even start at that point, that is nothing to do with the building. These people just don't want to work. And one person started, and it just spans out. And my experience is that we do get issues of mass hysteria. But let me be very clear on it. It doesn't start with mass hysteria. This is usually the end point. What I've been finding is that when there are issues, building-related illnesses, and or sick building syndrome, and management refuse to address the issue, then over months or over years, it elevates to a point where persons become in this state of mass hysteria. And I have a real example of that happened in Barbados where there was this situation where persons were claiming the building was sick, and for some reason they thought it was related to the pesticides. Many companies have contracts where the AC people come in on a quarterly or 6-monthly basis and clean the ACs. The janitorial persons come in and do nightly or weekly cleans, and the pest control persons come in and do monthly or quarterly sprays. And for whatever reason, the persons at this company say that the problems of this building related to the spray, the insecticide that was being sprayed. So whenever the insecticide was sprayed, whenever there was a treatment of the building, persons were getting really sick. Eyes burning, they want to vomit, they want to collapse, all sorts of things. And the management decided to stop the spraying. But having had it done before, they owed the company some money. So the company sent the messenger who had on a shirt with the logo to collect the check. The staff ran out. They could smell the chemical coming through the AC, all sorts of problems. And this was a situation of certainly mass hysteria. But as I said, it's the end point. Because those persons had been in such discomfort and undergoing such health challenges for so long, that now that they even see the logo, they don't have to smell the chemical, just see the logo, it triggered in the mind and then it triggered to the body, psychosomatic. So I want to caution us not to start off trying to blame persons and every situation go to this mass hysteria. When it does occur, in my experience, it's actually an endpoint where persons are now so stressed out that they don't even wait till the last straw. They only hear the straw is coming and their back will break. So be very careful about this. Other terms that we need to be clear on will be like indoor air quality. And again, we have lots of mix-up with indoor air quality, indoor environmental quality, and so on. And for our working definition, I want to suggest that indoor air quality is the physical, chemical, and biological characteristics of the indoor air. Physical, chemical, and biological. And as physical, we are speaking about energies. So you're not talking about objects in terms of something that has mass and weight. But for instance, if you have radioactive items within the air, let's say for instance radon, then that particular energy, that radioactive energy, will be a physical characteristic. And radon is a radioactive gas that can be inhaled. It is not very present in Barbados, but we tend now to go and import it. Very often you find that slate and granite, which is imported to Barbados, actually is actively giving off radon. I cannot tell you all is given off because it depends on the source. But what I can tell you is that to date, every piece that I have tested is actually giving off radon. So we are actually now bringing a physical energy into the workplace, in some cases, more often into your homes. So those of you who can afford slate and granite, you may want to give me a call, get it checked. Us poor folk don't have that problem, right? A little bit of tiles, ceramic tiles don't give you that problem. But it's a real issue. So when you start bringing these things in here, you add a physical entity that is in fact impacting on the indoor air quality. Because now you have an energy or an energy source which you can actually inhale, take into your body, and cause a problem. Most other energies are not really part of the indoor environment, indoor air environment, but they're part of the indoor environmental environment. But radon is an example of one where you can actually inhale and therefore degrade your air because of that. So if you have these physical, chemical, and biological characteristics of air, in non-residential workplaces with no internal process. What that's basically saying is that when we are talking about indoor air quality, we are not talking about homes. The term should not rightly be used in the domestic environment or the residential environment. You can talk about air quality in the resident, but indoor air quality is reserved for non-residential, non-industrial environments. That pretty much means office environments. Then we hear about contaminants and even airborne contaminants. Persons will come and tell you that the building is sick because the air is bad, it's contaminated. And what is a contaminant? And this is a very important definition. Any physical, chemical, or biological agent that is not normally present in the air is a contaminant. And I think we all know that and accept that. But the second part is equally important. You may have some entity or some chemical or biological agent that is normally in the air, but now is present in an abnormally high level, that is still deemed to be a contaminant. So it is possible to have the air contaminated with oxygen, because oxygen is normally present in air. We need to live with it. But if you were in some environment where there were canisters, let's say a medical environment, where you have oxygen cylinders, or even in the industrial setting where you're doing oxyacetylene welding, and those oxygen cylinders were in fact leaking and enriching the amount of oxygen in the air, then oxygen has become a contaminant. It is now present in an abnormal concentration. And though we need oxygen to live, I don't know if you are aware that we actually cannot live off of oxygen. If you were to try to breathe pure oxygen, we will actually go blind and then you will eventually die. So oxygen can be a contaminant. So when we hear about the mold, you hear employers saying, well, mold is always present in the air. Yes, it is. But if it's present within the working environment in an abnormally high concentration, then that mold, which is nice and normal and even desirable on the outside, becomes a contaminant, an airborne contaminant on the inside. So these working definitions are important. I hope you will hold on to them, so then as the other presenters come, you will have a better feel as to what we're up against. And certainly by understanding issues, you can come to the cure and the solutions. So then looking at the definitions, building-related illness, sick building syndrome, contaminants, and so on, what then is acceptable air? And ASHRAE has some time ago offered a definition. And they say that acceptable air is air in which there is no known contaminants at harmful concentrations, not at these abnormally high concentrations, okay? As deemed by cognizant authorities. So what they are expecting is that the particular authority in the given jurisdiction should be issuing standards, should be saying what is deemed to be acceptable in our environment. So when we have the accusations that, oh, we're using North American standards and European standards, that is in fact an indictment on ourselves and our governments, that we are not putting up standards that are relevant to our jurisdiction, so we have to borrow. It's the best we can do. So the authorities have to either indicate or come up with, hopefully in some scientific way, what is considered to be acceptable. And if the levels are above those, then it becomes unacceptable air quality. But this definition also goes on to another part. It says, and with which a substantial majority of the persons exposed to that air, 80% or more, do not express dissatisfaction. And this is the part that the employers don't like, because very often 98% of the staff already is expressing dissatisfaction. The 2% being the manager and the other supervisory persons. So they don't like this particular part, but understand that there are two aspects. So the implication here is that one is scientific. You know how you have to check for the contaminants and look at concentrations against standards. But you also need to get the feedback. The feelings and the feedback of the people are important. And if they are saying that all is not well, I am not feeling comfortable, it's not enough to say, well, oh, but the instruments say that everything is all right. Both must be there. Both must be there. You cannot tell persons what they're feeling. You have to create the environment to try to make that better. So this is the definition from ASHRAE. So now very quickly, if we have these sick building issues, the sick building syndrome, building-related illnesses and the like, what are some of the issues that you can expect? And I'm asked to quickly look at health issues, productivity issues, and capital costs. So I'll do this in terms of a list. Health issues. You're going to get persons complaining about odor, some aesthetic issues, unpleasant smells. We get a lot of those. This place smells funny. This place got an odor. You hear it very often on the radio where buildings, public buildings and private buildings and schools close because of some odor, an unidentified odor. So that is an issue. And it creates major discomfort and fear. Because if you can smell something, you don't know what it is, and it smells really, really bad, the first thing is, in your mind, it's toxic. It's potentially poisonous. It's potentially carcinogenic. And mental stress, that fear and that discomfort is also an issue. Then we have persons who have complaints of irritation, skin and eyes, respiratory problems, allergies, they're feeling drowsy and sleepy. I hope my speaking is not making anybody like that now, no narcotic effects. I hear there's going to be a jury, so don't judge me too harsh, and they see we have a QC in the audience. I'm in trouble, huh? But basically, we have a lot of this, especially in the afternoon periods, where workers are complaining about these narcotic and lackadaisical feelings. And the first thing we say is niggeritis. But I can tell you that some time ago, NACOSH, you heard about NACOSH mentioned, they actually undertook a study, and it was two-pronged where there were HR persons doing interviews and trying to get feedback and checking records in various sectors, and then empirical testing to see if there was a correlation between the quality of the air and the kind of complaints. And in the majority of the cases, especially in the financial institutions and so on, there was a very positive correlation, where the narcotic feelings were in fact associated with high levels of contaminants in the air and a degradation of the overall air quality in the afternoon periods. And then we have infections. So the effects will continue. Diseases caused sometimes by mold or other yeast-like fungi. We have invasion of living tissue by some fungi. It doesn't happen often, but it actually does happen. I know of a case, I like to punctuate with local examples, where a lady actually got a fungus growing up in her nostril, having inhaled it. And this was a case where the fungus was growing on a wall. It was a known issue, but nobody figured it was going to get that bad. And as the lady was complaining, oh, she's just being hysterical and all sorts of strange things. But she had the means to go and get it checked out. And many doctors in Barbados couldn't figure it out. And went overseas and actually found that fungus had found a home up in the nostrils. Major operations trying to get that corrected. So that can happen. We can also have localized infections, especially if you have skin that is abraded or in some way compromised. Then we have some brand name conditions. Organic dust toxic syndrome. See the word there again, syndrome. And this is often where persons are inhaling large quantities of dust. It can happen, for instance, with grain dust. It used to happen quite a bit in Barbados with bagasse, but we never used to use that particular word. They have the term bagassosis. But what is actually happening here is that this organic dust is forming food for these microorganisms, especially mold. And when you inhale it, again, the mold or the fungi will actually cause these flu-like symptoms. And if you have medical practitioners who are not aware of these things, then they treat you for the flu. And they give you all sorts of medicines that don't work, and then the medicines make you sick. No, you've got two problems, because they're not picking up the correct issues. And then we have another brand name one, hypersensitive pneumonitis. You like that one, huh? This may occur after repeated exposures to an allergen, and it can result in permanent lung damage. Hypersensitivity. Hyper, like hyper dog, it means it's heightened. And what happens in these situations is, having been exposed to these conditions over and over, the conditions that nobody wants to address, the conditions that persons are making excuses for and say, but the same organisms are on the outside. But remember I said, if it's an elevated concentration, then it becomes a contaminant. And these things are left, and eventually persons build up an intolerance to the point that a very small concentration or a very small exposure results in a very significant reaction. So normally when you have an allergy, the reaction of the person is in relation to the amount of exposure. There are some persons who can't use nuts. You have my sympathy, I love nuts. But in those cases, if you use 2 nuts, you get a little swelling. You use a whole bag of nuts, you have a big problem. But the others who are hypersensitive to nuts, if they only smell nuts, or I've heard about persons going and getting massages, and the massage oil had in nut oil, and there was a problem. Can you tell me to stop? Okay, fine. So in those cases, they have hypersensitivity. So just imagine having those sort of situations from workplace exposures. So it can happen. And then we have aspergillosis. Very popular in Barbados is the genus of fungi called Aspergillus. And some persons who have testing done, they get results saying, oh, we have Aspergillus. The fact that you find Aspergillus is not a problem. There are about 166 species of Aspergillus. But some of them are problematic. And some of them can, in fact, cause this condition that is so severe that it has a name. It's given its own name. So when you start finding these particular species, or particular genus, as you say, then it's important to go down to the species to see if you have one of the bad ones. Because it's not enough to say that it's present in Barbados. Generally, you may have the species defined in your workplace, and it can cause these kind of conditions. And then we have other respiratory conditions, sometimes caused by bacteria. We have Histoplasma capsulatum and Cryptococcus neoformans. And these are bacteria that are often present in the droppings of birds and bats. And I specifically mention these because we are having a major problem these days with pigeons invading roosts. And what is complicating the situation is that the same staff who are complaining about the pigeons messing up the place and making it unsightly go to lunch and feed them. We can't have it both ways. We have to stop feeding pigeons. Having pigeons flying around is not a good thing. I like animals. Pigeons should be in a cage, not flying around and going in people's roofs and offices and so on. I share real situations. I remember a scare which the lady got. She was sitting at her desk, and a young pigeon dropped out through the ventilator onto her desk. The moment ball, a UFO. I don't know if you've ever seen a young bird with no feathers and big eyes and a big beak. And imagine sitting at your office desk and this thing dropped from the AC. You're expecting air to come to the AC, and this thing just dropped on the woman's desk. That happened here in Barbados. The birds were actually living. They had a nest in the air-conditioned duct. So you can imagine when they were having air quality complaints, that's how we got called in the first place. And everybody's looking all around, and the birds on the inside dropping, building the nest and making the droppings. And in addition to lice, which are associated with birds, mites that are associated with birds, then we have the bacteria. And we have been in business for some years now, and we have been testing on request bird droppings. And in our early years, we never came across these big words, Histoplasma and Cryptococcus. But the news is this: in recent years, I can speak for the birds, some of the pigeons in Bridgetown, we are now finding these organisms in the droppings. I have checked with a medical person at the hospital, and he has indicated to me that to date, they do not have any record of anyone presenting with the condition. Here is called histoplasmosis. There's no record yet. But it is a condition that if someone gets it, you will know, because the person usually has to be hospitalized. It's a significant problem. And what I'm saying is that the organism is present, at least in those pigeons in Bridgetown. It's not good news feeding these cute little pigeons. So we have them in here. Other effects, some of them are a bit more minor. These are the ones that usually start the ball rolling. Persons going on mornings and having gotten past not liking the building and the people in the building, then they start getting these issues: eye irritation, itching and watering. These sound familiar? Nasal irritation, congestion, throat irritation, coughing, hoarseness, change of voice, sometimes even loss of voice happens. Skin irritation, headaches, nausea, fatigue, and change of sensitivity in your taste. Now, these are so general that persons simply dismiss them. Somebody comes and complains to HR and say, well, you know, my mouth tastes funny. You ask them if they use Listerine in the morning, and you just want to pass it off. And we have these sort of things where persons are sometimes insulted when they actually raise these issues. Itching, skin itching, you had a bath. So these are so general that we sometimes tend to ignore them. These are often the minor indicators. And if you don't deal with these, then you move on to brand name diseases, and then you move on to the mass hysteria, because now persons are so afraid of the environment that any little thing will trigger a march out. So those are some of the health effects. And then, of course, we have mental effects. The ILO has been pushing a lot about mental health, and indoor air quality can lead to that. Because if you go into an environment where you fear for your life, you think that this workplace is going to give you some cancer or some disease, you can't be comfortable in there. You go in there under duress all the time. So the psychological strain and stresses of just working in that environment are very real. And then, of course, you have low morale. Persons don't like this place anymore. They're just there because they need a job. They've got a mortgage to pay. But if they win lotto tomorrow, you ain't seeing them again, you know. That's what's happening. Low morale, they know like the place. Then the hysteria and the mass hysteria, which I mentioned. So these are the sort of mental effects that eventually happen after persons have been experiencing the medical signs and symptoms. Then moving on quickly to some of the productivity impacts, and I'll just read these ones as a list. If you are having these challenges, building-related illnesses, sick building syndrome, hysteria, and all the brand name conditions that I mentioned, then you're going to have reduced functionality and slow tempo of work. People come to work, they're not so well, they can't really work too fast. Okay, major problem. You're going to have them having discomforts, malaise, and mental duress because they know like the particular place. Then you're going to have staff in the sick bay rather than the workstation. You don't get much work on them that way. So they're present at work, but they can't function at the workstation. And this is where very often managers think that the persons are just malingering, when in fact sometimes they are suffering seriously and they're just being brave to come to work. Then you have, this is a very popular one, staff spending time checking with co-workers. So you get to work at 8:30. After 9:30, you still calling around. I smell something by me, you smell it, but you know you smell it over. You only everybody calling around talking about the air quality. And no one is counting that as lost time. That is a significant issue for productivity. And if you have a company that has branches, they're calling all over the place. You smell it down in Spicetown, you smell it in Christchurch, and they're at work. You got to pay them. But no work because the air quality issues are so devastating for them that they spend the time trying to check it out. And again, talk about the hysteria. If you have persons reaching that point, ask to smell something. It may be somebody opened their lunch, they're going sardines, but you smell something, and everybody panicking because another order, another problem. Persons are living on the edge. So you can't get much production out of these persons. Lost time from frequent walkouts. You see it often in the evening news. Early closure of business. Staff walk out. It often happens because them in the business, they get the calls. The staff don't even walk in. They turn up in the morning and they smell something, everybody stay outside. 10 o'clock, they're still outside. Talk about production. So whatever strategic goals you have got, whatever organizational plans just went out through the window because they cannot work without people. Computers don't work with themselves. So all of this is significantly impacting productivity because the staff at the side of the road rather than at their workstations. And then ultimately, you're going to have sick certificates coming in. If persons are constantly walking out and have the absenteeism, they stay home the 2 days, but they have to come back the third, eventually they can get tired being out for 2 days and coming to work and being sick on the third. So they go to the doctor who's now going to give them 2 weeks. And if that doesn't work, 2 months. And I've known of situations where workers have been continuously out of office for as much as a year. And then it's when they call the QCs and the other lawyers because this is a big fight whether they have to keep the job and whether they have to pay them and so on. But this actually happens, okay? And then lastly, some of the capital costs. All of those issues obviously going to have impacts on the bottom line. So payment of salaries for presenteeism. The persons that work within sick bay, but they're at work. You got to pay them. So they're present. They're at work and they call them wrong to find out who else smell it, what he smell. They're at work, but you have to pay them. Payment for overtime now to make up for the lost productivity during the day because the company still has its goals to meet and deliverables to make. Sometimes you have to recruit temporary staff. That's for the ones who get now 2 or 3 months sick leave. Business was going, so you have now to go through the process of recruitment, which itself is a cost, and then you have to pay those persons. Payment for unscheduled air conditioning servicing. Very often, I've watched this progression. There's a problem. The first thing that the companies say they do is to call in the air conditioning persons. They don't check what the problem is, call in air conditions, do a cleaning. 2 or 3 weeks later, staff complain again. So now you're bringing the industrial or commercial cleaners, clean the whole place. 2 or 3 weeks later, problem again. Somebody's calling the pest control persons because they say it's dust mites, or some lice from birds, or mites from birds. So you pay them. So you pay air conditioning persons, you pay industrial cleaners, you pay pest control persons. Then you call the professional architects, the engineers, and the indoor quality specialists and tell us you don't got no money to pay. Exactly whose problem is that? I'll make the statement that we don't work for free. Because the reality is we do high science. So maybe the next time you want to start the other direction, start to find out what the problem is first. Just imagine you feeling sick and you run in town, buy some medicine and drink it, and then realize you got the wrong medicine. You don't start with the pharmacist, you start with the doctor. But that's what we do in our office. We try to fix the problems ourselves. Lots of times persons call us and ask us, we want this space tested for mold. I ask, well, why? Because if you know it's mold, then you don't need me. If you have an indoor air quality problem, you need to find out what it is. Don't start off with the conclusion that it's mold. Because if we test and we don't find mold, you're no better off. Remember, I say you have chemical, biological, and physical issues. And you start off with the assumption, not even bacteria, that has mold. So these are really problems coming, spending all this money and not getting any further. Then unplanned expenditure on repairs. All of a sudden, you got to fix everything in the building. And when they're at it, the unions might get involved, the workers get involved. But you're at it, I want here painted, I want a new computer. It changed everything because, hey, you're spending money now. So you find yourself spending and making all these changes, not necessarily correcting the problem, you're going on a hit and miss basis, hoping that you get the right thing. Unscheduled replacement of large fixed assets. Because you were not checking on and maintaining the air conditioning system, now the AC people tell you, oh, you have to change this 20-ton AC unit. And we ain't talking about the weight of it, we're talking about the volume is actually churning out in terms of air. Because chances are it weighs more than 20 tons. So in addition to the cost of the AC unit, now you've got to pay the crane people to come and get it on the roof. And the overtime because they've got to do it on a Sunday evening. And all these other things. Major capital costs because of these indoor air quality problems. And then payment for legal representation, or QC would like to hear that. The company now has to defend against all of these accusations, real or otherwise. So the doctor sends in some reports, the person goes to an attorney who sends in a report, and they now want damages, compensation for all of this duress and damaged health. And the company now needs to get legal advice as to how should we proceed. Another cost. So I hope you recognize that there are serious issues, and I've touched on some of the health impacts, productivity impacts, and capital impacts. These are the issues. Is there a cure? Hopefully others will tell you that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Oxley. I think that he has set the stage very well for us. If there are any burning questions, I will entertain too. I see one of the jurors.
I have one burning issue, and it's the physical quality of air, the temperature. He hasn't spoken about temperature at all. But like, for instance, this morning my employer has put me here in a warm bubble. So I'm in this room, the rest of you are cool. I am not happy because I'm perspiring. And so I'm an employee with a indoor air quality problem.
Your localized
mentioned about discomfort, that often comes in with the temperature and humidity in that particular mix. Okay, so hopefully someone else will deal with it. But temperature is usually not a significant health issue. You don't get sick from temperature. You will get sick from other issues. So you are uncomfortable. If you sweat in a whole lot, you're going to die. You might feel you're going to die. You're not actually going to die. It's sort of it's actually hotter. But temperature also has another consideration. If your environment is favorable, both from the perspective of moisture content, humidity, and even condensation of moisture, and temperature, it can facilitate the growth of bacteria and mold. So now you have a health issue because of the invasion of mold. You may have allergic reactions or some of this hypersensitive pneumonitis and so on I mentioned, because you're facilitating the growth. And this is really what I was hinting at when I mentioned about contaminants. You don't have an organism in a concentration that is abnormal. And very often that is harbored and facilitated by the mix of temperature and humidity within the environment. But the person themselves will only have comfort issues from the temperature and humidity, but then the other entities can be the additional problems.
Excuse me, I have a very quick question, if I may.
Just a quick answer?
Quick spin on it. What is your take on different types of air quality being contaminated by persons who may have a bad flu and they want to come to work and they're working in a confined and air-conditioned environment, and 4 days later, 3 other members of staff come down with the flu? What is your recommendation in managing air quality with respect to people with influenza and those kinds of things?
So really you want to find out if, when you're sick, whether you should stay at home or not.
Well, the short answer is probably cheaper to pay that one person to stay home than have to pay all the other staff when they're out, you know? But very often, if you have issues like that, they do not fall under the gambit of injury equality per se, though they're relevant. Those are often dealt with as public health issues. So if you have someone who with a contagious disease, including flu, then the Ministry of Health will probably get more involved in that than the Ministry of Labor. They will pass it on. But from the internal perspective, managers and HR persons, you have an issue, and it's being transmitted through the air. So it's not, as you say, the definitions that we mentioned for indoor air quality, those chemical and biological things, but it's being transmitted in the air and possibly through the AC system. So you need to deal with it from an HR perspective and gently suggest to this person that they're better off staying home. And it may be better in some cases, because sometimes they come because if they stay there, they're going to lose money. That's what it comes down to. Yes, there's national insurance benefit. That's only 2/3 of the salary. People are already struggling to live off a full salary. You can't live off of 2/3. So in some ways, it's better for the company to simply say, well, okay, we can cover you for the week, than wait till everyone else comes over, they hand half the staff out and try and deal with the problem. Thank you. Good.